Hi, welcome to another workforce planning training course. This one is specifically the workforce planning course WRaPT Redesign, an approach to redesigning workforce, and it is session 0, which is an overview. I think last week I recorded the overview to workforce planning. Now this is the overview to one of the courses, which is WRaPT Redesign. I think it needs an overview because there are somewhere between 5 and 10 different sessions for this, so I need to take you through what WRaPT Redesign entails. Before I do that though, just cover who we are and how we do things. My name is Colin Lurie. I work for Carados, which is a management training and development company. We focus on building skills in frontline health and care managers of any type, and we predominantly focus in workforce planning, cost control, customer and patient service, and general management skills. At Carados, we also focus on workforce planning delivery quite a lot, and we work with Lancashire and South Cumbria NHS Trust and Health Education England to provide and support the WRaPT tool, which is a workforce modelling tool, free to use, online, which we deliver, as I say, it's free for anyone in health and social care. That tool is managed by these guys. They are the WRaPT team. They are based at Lancashire and South Cumbria, and they are commissioned by HEE, and they are able to teach you modelling using the WRaPT tool, and they're able to give you access to that tool, which is a great tool for managing workforce current states and future states options appraisals and that sort of thing. So that's who we are. The way we go about things is we have a very specific approach to development. We provide tools and techniques like the WRaPT tool and like these training courses entirely for free. What you need to provide is you need to provide the time, the capacity, and you need to take the time to do the training yourselves, or you can do it in training courses that we run. You also need to make sure you've got the support of your organisation. So that's the infrastructure and support. What you do really ought to be relevant to that organisation if you are using that time to develop your skills. And we talk quite often about how you can build what you're doing into the infrastructure of the business, make it relevant to executives so that when something else important comes up, they don't automatically stop your training and move on to other things. Finally, the peak of the pyramid there is project. We always say that there is very little point in training if you're not actually trying to achieve something. It gives you a reason to learn, a chance to practice, and something to prove success. So it's certainly worthwhile you actually having a project in mind and go through that project whenever you're doing any of this redesign training. Otherwise, what's the point? Or you'll have forgotten it by the time you get to actually use it. So those are the aspects of development, and we talk about that every time because it is important. So what is this module? Well, this module, first of all, the topic is workforce planning. Say in this workforce planning topic, we cover all sorts of things from what it is, how to redesign it, how to develop a plan, etc., etc. What we're focusing on is course B, workforce redesign. Okay, and the key elements are in the workforce redesign are going to be about understanding the high-level process, setting the project up to succeed, understanding the current state, what's currently going on, working out what we want in the future, modelling that change, and then planning and implementing that change. What we are going to cover today is the overview, where we talk about the high-level redesign process, where we will take you through the planned program and the different steps in the redesign process. What is the planned program? Well, it's this. In reality, there are 5 core courses. We're going to cover scope and mobilize, understand the current state, develop the future state, modeling the future state, and implementation. They are the 5 standard steps, which we'll talk about in a second. But in order to make sure that each one of them is not too long, we're going to have at least 5 separate courses, one specifically on data, otherwise understanding the current state becomes quite a long course. We'll talk about how to facilitate a workshop, which is important to developing the future state. We'll talk about process mapping, which is important to understand the current and developing the future state especially. And we will have a specific course, in fact we already have one recorded, on the 7 R's, of which 4 are written there: recruit, retain, retrain, return, re-energize, and a couple of other R's. Those are the responses to when you've got a gap and how you address that gap. And then finally, there'll be a specific course on WRaPT modelling recorded by the WRaPT team. When we talk about modelling in B4, what we're covering there is general modelling, which you can do in WRaPT Excel or any other system of your choice. You can do it on paper if you want, but we'll have a specific course on WRaPT modelling at some point. So that's the planned programme, and we'll be going through each of those. But the first one, in this case, is the overview. And I just want to show you what the WRaPT redesign approach is. Fairly busy old slide here, and the overlapping circles do not help the boxes. But this is the general approach, and it's got 5 different steps or phases, whatever you want to call them. And then it's got a number of individual steps within each of those phases. So scope and mobilise, starting right from the start, understanding your current state, developing your future state, modelling your future state, and implementation. Now, we used to have this as a linear diagram, which made it a whole lot easier to draw and to see, but it really didn't set out the complexity of a redesign program. So quite often we'll get called into a redesign program round about sort of developing the future state, and we'll have to sort of backtrack. We'll have to start developing the future state, but backtrack to make sure we're dealing with the current state and the scope and mobilisation. That happens quite a lot because people assume there's a project and there isn't. So you don't always start in the same place. They're not also, they're all a bit more interrelated. You don't really start with scope and mobilising and then never come back to it. You're doing that sort of work all the way through it, checking stuff all the way through it. So in reality, what you've got are 5 bubbles, and you need to be able to do all of those 5 bubbles. It kind of starts with scope and mobilise, and it kind of ends with implementation, obviously. But in reality, it's a bit more fluid than that. The other thing as well is that this is called WRaPT Redesign. Now, we call it WRaPT Redesign because we put the WRaPT at the front of everything, but you don't have to use the WRaPT tool. It's just one we've developed while we've been working with WRaPT, and it's a decent enough name, I suppose. There are other systems, though, and we have talked about those already actually in the overview. There are other approaches you can take. One such as 6-step, for example, would have you develop starting with the future state, pretty much, starting with a model and developing your future state without worrying too much about your current state. You don't need that later for planning. Our approach is to do current state first, but you don't have to. You could have a look at the future state first and then catch up with the current state if that's what you wanted to do. The whole point of the WRaPT redesign stuff here is that you'll learn bits that should be valuable whether you're using this approach or whether you're using any other approach. So that's why they're in bubbles. Having said we don't use WRaPT, there are 2 places in here where you can use WRaPT at least. One is understanding the current state and recording that current state. You can use the WRaPT tool for that. And modelling the future state, you can use the WRaPT tool for that as well. But like I say, being clear, you don't have to use any tool, or you can use any tool other than WRaPT if you want to. So that's the overview. So we're going to go through each of the individual steps now just to talk about what you're going to cover, and then we'll finish. So first step, scoping and mobilising. I mean, I think the reality here is that we need to set this up as a project. This is one of 5 steps, and it's a separate step, and it's as important as any of the others. It's as important as working out your future state. What you need to make sure is that your workforce project or your overall redesign project is set up as a project. All right, so that you know why you're doing it. You're setting it up to succeed. You know what success looks like. You've got all the right people into the right parts. Yeah. So what I mean by that is that you've got the right people involved in the governance. You've got the right people involved in the project itself, doing the project work. You've got the right people advising you on what's going on. You've got the right people in the redesign meetings, and you've got the right people involved in implementation. And it's critical that you do that. We also make sure you're writing it all down so everyone knows their roles. Okay, and that's absolutely critical again. One client I've recently worked with said, when it comes to the project, there's There's lots of people watching from the balcony, but there's not a lot of people on the dance floor, which I thought was quite a nice way of putting how most projects are. It's being clear on who is doing what and who's responsible for what. Because we're talking about redesign here, and that means moving people from a state which they're currently in, which they might moan about, but it's still one they're used to moving them to a future state. There might be multiple organisations involved. There will be multiple teams and definitely multiple people involved. It's going to get complicated. That means you've got to have the right people in place from the start. You've got to know why you're doing it. And if you're going to put yourself through this heartache, you better know what the main reason is why you are doing it. So all of those are absolutely critical. Also, from a scope and mobilise point of view, we need to make sure we are sorting out the information governance, and that may well need to be done first. Information governance is important. It's also a bit of an art, not a science, by which I mean that it's not easy to work out exactly how long it's going to take. So sorting out the information governance is absolutely critical. So first step, first phase, scope and mobilise, absolutely critical. Okay. Equally, documenting the current state is very, very important. It's where, as I say, I start in terms of I do that before coming up with a future state, just old-fashioned that way. Those of you that have been trained in sort of as is to be, you'll get that. In reality, it's understanding what is going on. You're building a rich picture of the current situation. For me, it really is that rich picture because I'm going to use it in the redesign to present it to people as to what currently exists, so that in the future people can think about what they want to see exist. So in some ways you're telling a story, but what you've got to do is you've got to make sure you learn from what's already been done. So that's why we talk there about reviewing documents. There will already have been a load of inputs when you start this project, and you've got to get into that. Excuse me, just opening my drink. That's very professional, isn't it, for a recorded video? So you need to learn from what's already been done and not ride roughshod over that. Then you've got to build your current state view, which you do through a sort of mix of requesting data, collecting data, and analysing data. And we'll talk about, what is good practice when it comes to requesting data, and what sort of data you do need to collect. And there will be a separate session on data just generally, what sort of data you need to be collecting. And then finally, you're making sure the information meets the needs of the challenge, so you're aligning the data to the challenge, and then you're engaging with stakeholders, which you do at the start and at the end. So again, this is pretty circular, where you make sure that what you're collecting fits the scope and it fits what your stakeholders are expecting. So documenting the current state, understanding the current state, absolutely critical. Third, another important one, I mean, let's face it, this is the brass ring. What we're in it for is coming up with the future state. Now, I suppose we've been talking so far about this as a project, and there's two ways that this could be. One, this could just be a workforce project. So you could just be focusing on workforce redesign and the workforce future. Somebody could have come up with a new process model, a new set of locations. They might have come up with the new equipment, and they come up with a whole new approach to things, which is great. But I'm not sure you can come up with a new model unless you take the staff into account. So I never think it's great if people have done everything but workforce and you're doing a workforce redesign. In reality, you'll be running a workforce element of a project, or you'll be running a whole project which redesigns everything but using workforce as the lens. So what I mean by that is that you will be interested in redesigning the process. You will be interested in introducing new technology, digital solutions, equipment, potentially changing locations and considering will staff be based together or separated or whatever. You will be interested in all this stuff when you're doing workforce redesign, because the only way that you're going to meet the workforce challenge is to include some sort of process redesign. So where you might be is you might just be focused here on developing the future state for the workforce, but you'll probably be interested in developing the future state for more than the workforce. And that will be both process technology, organisation, and facilities and estates. So developing the future state is about developing the new workforce model. For me, it uses the current state as a reference. It will include the great stuff around workforce role redesign, of course, which is great, great stuff to do. That is really where we look at the skills and the story associated with the process, and that allows us to really redesign who does what, and then build good roles off the back of that. So that's quite exciting. Then there's the developing options. So it's always good about developing options for the future state, and then again making sure that the future state meets the challenge and it meets the needs of the stakeholders. So it's going to be absolutely critical again. We're also going to do some separate courses on workforce facilitation, on process mapping, and on the 7 R's. As I said at the start, we want those separate sections, otherwise this will be a very long course. Then when you've done that, you've got the current state, you've got the future state, then you've got for us, you then have to model it. And they say this course will cover a general discussion of workforce models. You can use Excel, you can WRaPT, any other tool you want, you can use a piece of paper, doesn't really matter. It'll cover generally how do you do workforce models, the different types, how you might want to go about it. I personally am a big user of WRaPT, but I use it probably 50% of the time when I'm doing workforce redesigns. Sometimes I like Excel. When we did a recent bit of work in Preston and Chorley, I used Excel first and then transferred it into WRaPT for sharing purposes. There's all sorts of different options, and yeah, whichever one floats your boat, whichever one makes the most sense is really what you're going to focus on. We will do a separate course on actually using the free WRaPT tool for all purposes. As I say, the WRaPT team will give you that if you want to use that for modelling. And then finally, equally important, all the others, you've got to implement it. There's no point doing the redesign if you're not going to implement it, but far too many plans that you pull together do not get implemented in a consistent manner. So what we're going to talk about here is about planning and executing the actions needed to make the workforce plan a reality. We'll talk about COTA as our model for change. There's various other models for change, and whichever one you want to use is fine. I'll use COTA as that model for change because it's one I've used throughout my career and it's blooming marvellous. We'll talk about developing a benefits realisation plan, and critically we'll talk about creating a business case for investment. I will introduce you we need more teeth theory on how it's important to get more and more investment resource and people involved in making this actually happen. So we'll talk about how you might create a business case for investment and make it happen. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. So in summary, 5 key phases, lots and lots of individual steps. You will consider this both in terms of it just being a workforce redesign project or a project to redesign where workforce is the driver, but we have to redesign everything. So we'll consider that, those different options. We will consider the fact that you don't have to do it in this order, that you can do scope and mobilise and future state before you do current state if you want to. It's really up to you, depending on which system you use, and we'll cover the fact. Lots of things that will be useful and interesting in its own right, no matter what other approach you use. Whether you're using Calderdale, Swipe, STAR, Clear, whether you're using 6-step, patient-centric, population-centric, or whatever else you want to be using, hopefully the stuff in this course will be interesting for you. As I say, this stuff is all free. We call it WRaPT Redesign. It is just a generic redesign methodology, and it does fit with those core HEE offers around Clear, but especially around 6-step, and does fit to STAR, and we will talk about STAR as we go through. So that is the redesign course. What would be your next steps? Well, you can register to the WRaPT tool if you haven't already done so. The link is there. This is wrap.org.uk. You can buy the bumper book of health and care workforce planning. Should be available May, June 21. Available on Amazon. Basically contains everything that's available in these courses plus more. You might want to visit the WRaPT website. You might want to visit the Health Education England workforce planning pages, all of which provide you with some information there, especially if you want to learn 6-step electronically and slightly more professionally than this set of slides. Then that's available if you're in the health sector. And then you might want to visit the Carados website, or you might want to visit our YouTube channel, which you should already be on. Must make the links on there soon. But hopefully you're going to continue the WRaPT redesign course at session B1. But if the WRaPT redesign course is not for you, then hopefully you'll start either WRaPT Plan, which is a lot shorter, WRaPT Hub, which is a lot shorter, and WRaPT Frontline. Those courses designed for people that are in order either trying to develop a workforce plan, want to develop some system level workforce hub type stuff, or the last one is very much about the skills needed for frontline workforce planning. Hope that's good. I hope you'll join us on another course soon. I probably need to say all sorts of things from a YouTube point of view about subscribing, liking, ringing bells, or whatever else you're supposed to do. Please do all of that stuff to aid other people seeing this stuff, and leave any comments that you've got. Get in touch if you need to. I think that's enough. Have a good day. Speak soon.